Thank you all very much for coming. It's July the 20th of 2017, and this is the second time I've given this presentation here at Tsunami. I gave a talk previously at June 29th of this year, and I'm going to mention some things that have happened that go along with what I talked about before. But before I do that, I want to give a sense of where I see us in time astrologically, in addition to taking a look at the eclipse paths. In Chinese astrology, the election that occurred in 2016 was in the year of the monkey. This is associated with elections involving monkey business. And then it's interesting to note that the election of 1860, where Abraham Lincoln was elected, was also a monkey year election. And what we find then and now is the country divided. So even though we can see the division in the country, and you'll see a division actually of the single eclipse line when we get to that, but this is also an eclipse that unites us, because millions of people are going to come to be under this eclipse line over here. Nobody could bring this many Americans together for one common cause. It is my hope that this is only the beginning of people coming together, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Some other things about where we are in time. Yes. Okay, thank you. Some other things about where we are in time is mythologically, we are in the era of Typhon, the storm monster. Just frame of reference there. But now to get to our topic for tonight, I'd like to quote you from Hopi prophecy. Everything is coming to a time where prophecy and man's inability to live on earth in a spiritual way will come to a crossroads of great problems. This is the crossroads, a literal crossroads. The prophecy continues. If you are not spiritually connected to reality of how to live on earth, it's likely you won't make it. So this is a very significant time in American life. Now, what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to talk about how eclipses have been seen, and we can go to the next slide. Okay. Steve Martin sang "Atheists Don't Have No Songs." A great video on YouTube. He was on Letterman. And not only do atheists have no songs, they have no spirituality about eclipses whatsoever. And you're going to see lots and lots of information from a quote-unquote scientific point of view, but there won't be any talk about any spiritual perspectives in relation to the eclipse. So why don't we go to the next slide. Here, a man who begged to differ is Carl Jung, who told us that the earth has a soul, as well as indigenous people around the world who knew and continue to know that, and I'm sure many kindred spirits here in this room. So let's go to the next slide, please. Now, this slide here is a representation of a solar eclipse, and I'm going to come and talk about that momentarily, but this definitely brings a spiritual perspective when I tell you what's associated with this image. So now we can go to the next one, please. So here are different cultures and their perspectives on eclipses, and I'm starting with those cultural perspectives that are either primarily or entirely negative. And these are from all from ancient perspectives, not necessarily modern perspectives at all for these cultures. But basically, in these cultures, nothing good comes from an eclipse, except in one case related to the ancient Greeks. The ancient Chinese say this is a peak time of ongoing societal decay. The ancient Greeks said this is the time in which the gods abandoned the king or leader, because astrology was for the exceptional individuals. And then the ancient Hebrew say it's an end of an era, and there are also associations made to earthquakes and floods. In northern Brazil, excuse me, tribes there believe that eclipses are associated with the possible end of the world. Also, these eclipses can be associated in both certain tribes in Africa and in North America with times of war. That's going to be particularly relevant to what are called annular eclipses, but I'm going to talk about that later. So you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. In terms of other perspectives, eclipses as when evil demons attack the sun. In Yugoslavia, this is a werewolf. In the Maoris, it's demons. In Venezuela, it's a devil. In Korea, it's a demon dog. And in Vietnam, an evil frog. Next slide, please. There are cultures that see the sun as being eaten by some creature. So we start off with the serpent, which is how ancient India, ancient China, and the ancient Mayans all saw that it was a serpent who was eating the sun at a solar eclipse. The Finns had an unspecified animals eating the sun. Vikings had two dogs. One dog ate the solar eclipse, and the other dog was a lunatarian. The Bolivian lowlands, again, there was the dog theme, the huge dog there, and in Hungary, it was either a giant bird or a snake. Next slide, please. Okay. In terms of what we might, call more of a positive spiritual association, in Benin and Togo, this was a time to make peace, and there's a wonderful story from Greece where two armies were at war. They had been at war for 5 years. And when they saw that there was an eclipse, they said, hey, let's call this whole thing off. So good things can come out of eclipses, certainly. And when we talked about the exception in ancient Greeks, that's the one. The Huichol or the Tempaneo, and this is a Tempaneo image here of the solar eclipse. Also the Hopi, the Navajo, and the ancient Babylonians, they all saw this as a time of prayer. It was an important dynamic regarding prayer. In other cultures, prayer was important as well. We'll get to those. The Nootka people, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, of Vancouver Island, say that what happens at an eclipse, the door of heaven opens. Now, it's going to be an interesting thing to remember when we get up to the eclipse of 1811 and 1806. In terms of erotic spirituality, in Tahiti, of course, it's the moon is making love to the sun. Why not? And some Australian Aboriginal tribes see it the same way. And there's an interesting dynamic to that too, that we're looking up at the sun and then it goes dark. And it's almost like she pulls the curtain and says, privacy, please. So next slide. Now, this is where I want to honor people that I greatly appreciate, who this talk would not be possible, and this is the #1 man, Mr. Eclipse, Fred Espenak. He retired from the Goddard Space Flight Center in NASA in Greenbelt, my old PG County buddy, and he plotted all of the eclipse paths going back I think 2,000 years or more into the past, and the same into the future. And then his eclipse paths, any eclipse paths that you see in an astrology program or in anywhere on the internet, these all basically are due to the wonderful work of Fred. Now, Fred has 3 different websites. One of them is how to photograph an eclipse, if you're interested in that. Then there are two others. Fred's great, but I also want to honor at this point an astrologer who goes by the name of Bill Meridian, because Bill has been studying eclipse paths throughout the world, very interesting eclipse paths related, for instance, to World War II, and that inspired me to take a look at what in the world is going on in this country with these eclipse paths. And I'd also like to say one more thank you to the folks at Solar Fire, who have the Solar Maps program, because you're going to see a lot of Solar Maps eclipse charts tonight. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, now this is an image of 99.9% totality of the total eclipse that was photographed in France, but this eclipse went all the way across Europe. One thing that I found out that's very interesting is you can only have a great eclipse if it's in America. There was two great main eclipses, and there's the great eclipse of Great American Eclipse of 2017. You have a spectacular eclipse across Europe, but of course you can't call it great because not America. So next slide, please. Now we are finally going to get here to a few eclipses through American history, and there have been more than that we're going to see. But one thing about this country, as Dr. John says in one of his songs, if you only look out for number one, the American way, you're bound to step into number two. And essentially, this is essentially what happens with every single eclipse in America. It's a big mess of some kind. Okay, next slide, please. So the first slide that we're going to talk about is 1806, and it's actually, we're going to talk about the brother of Tecumseh, Tenskwatawa. And he was called the Prophet. His story, it's a wonderful recovery story. The white man's liquor had him significantly addicted, and his spirit was down. And he almost fell into the fire one time, and then he decided, that's it. I'm giving up the white man's whiskey and the white man's ways. And he realized that he was an incredible mystic. So much so that he became an influential leader called the Prophet. His old name translated into makes a lot of noise. His new name translates into open door. You saw that before. And he's the older brother of Tecumseh. Now, the image that you see here of Tecumseh, or any images that you see, they're all impressions from artists. Because Tecumseh didn't have that vanity of George Washington or Hamilton or any of these people that sit for their portrait. He was too busy trying to unite the various tribes in their common need to defend their lands against the white man. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So this is the path of the eclipse of 1806. And what happened with this eclipse path is Tenskwatawa, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name, Open Door, predicted this eclipse. And the prejudice against mysticism, spirituality, and any other race other than whites having any intelligence started right here that I know of, because the whites, and you'll see this today, in terms of even on the internet, oh, he couldn't have possibly known this eclipse was coming. He must have learned it from a white astronomer. So what they're talking about is, this is an almanac that I have from 1843, and it'll tell you when the eclipses are. So you're basically saying, oh no, he cheated. But people don't understand. If you're a spiritual person, if you're a mystical person, things come to you. Visions come to you. You can see things, you can know things. But this really got things going, because things were going very badly for the tribal people, including the Shawnee, who are, Tecumseh and his brother are Shawnee. And, but this is really what got the ball rolling. Where's my wonderful pointer? And right here is where they came together on the eclipse line. Next slide, please. Okay, now the eclipse, the next eclipse we're going to look at is the eclipse of 1811. And this is an amazing year. It's absolutely an amazing year. I'm going to talk surprisingly a lot this evening about 1811 and how much went on in 1811, early 1812. But one of the things that happened, this is not the exact image, this is the closest we can get because there wasn't an image of the original fire canoe, which is what the native people called the steamboat. This was Fulton had designed the first steamboat, and the first Roosevelt, not Teddy, not FDR, but Nicholas Roosevelt was the captain of the steamboat called New Orleans. And they left Pittsburgh, they came down the river, and when the native people saw this, they called it a fire canoe. Now the difference here is you'll see that this is the paddle wheels in the back with the New Orleans, it was on the side. But you can see how that definitely looks like a canoe on fire to me. Next slide, please. So that was 1811. This is the eclipse path for 1811. Notice same area where we saw the coming together before. This one is the one that's more associated with Tecumseh himself, who is also, both he and his brother were leaders. His brother was more spiritual leader. Tecumseh was more political leader. He was very eloquent, charismatic, handsome man. The Shawnees really went in for tattoos, but he didn't. But he and his brother just, basically they had pierced nostrils was what they had in common there. But he basically was going all over the place here, coming down considerable distances, trying to talk to the tribes and get them united to take a stand against the white man. And when he came here in Alabama, he was trying to get the Red Sticks was the name of the tribe. I was trying to get them into solidarity, and they were not cooperating. He said, well, I'll tell you what. When I get back to my homeland, which was up in the Detroit area at that time, Shawnee were semi-nomadic, he said, I'm going to stomp the ground and the earth will shake. Sure enough, that happened. Next slide, please. Okay. What happened in terms of the earth shaking was the first of 3 really big earthquakes in the New Madrid area. And it looks like New Madrid, but they pronounce it New Madrid. Go figure. It's America. Basically, what happened with these eclipses, the first was December 16th of 1811. And the eclipse shook, the earthquake shook church bells in Charlotte, church bells in Boston, cracked sidewalks in Washington, D.C., and was felt in Toronto. So a whole lot of shaking going on. There was one at 2:15 a.m., then another exactly 6 hours later at 8:15 a.m. on the 16th. Then we get into early 1812, and January 23rd, we have another really big one. And then February 7th, we have yet another really big one. And after that, we had 2,000 significant earthquakes, all in the same area. Now, nobody knew, including the supposedly smart white guys, that this was a seismic active area. It was unknown at that time. So this was pretty amazing that both of these Shawnee leaders were able to make these predictions about these earthquakes. Now, it's remarkable earthquakes. We're talking about changes of 30 feet of terrain. Imagine a 3-story building and it's flat. Or 3-story building and it's down to the third basement level. And we're also going to get a picture of Reelfoot Lake momentarily in that story. But while we're up here, you can see that even though the eclipse was exact here, the path of totality was exact, the area that we're talking about is right here. So that was about 80% of totality. Now, in order to have the amazing experience that all the millions are going to come, you have to be in that very narrow band. This time it's going to be about 70 miles. So, they vary somewhat, a little wider, a little smaller. But the significance of these eclipses relative to the Earth shaking doesn't have to be right on the line. And particularly when we find out where the seismic active areas are, which will be coming later this evening. Next slide, please. Okay, this is where the eclipse passes of 1806 and 1811 cross. Less than 5 years apart. The ones that we have coming are 2017 and 2024, a little less than 7 years apart. So when we get these eclipse paths that are pretty close together, these are really when really dramatic things happen. In other words, eclipses are pretty dramatic enough, but if you have the doubled effect, it's pretty amazing. So again, we have the path of the eclipses coming together here, and we can go to the next slide. Now, as if that wasn't enough in 1811, we have a comet that was visible in the sky for 260 days in the daytime, naked eye, okay? And this, the cycle of this comet is over 3,000 years. So, in terms of spirituality, which, if you have any, is the god or gods trying to tell us something? Gaia, Mother Earth, whoever, or a combination of all of the above? It's like, duh, we got a light in the sky. We're shaking the earth several times. And, do you all get it that you're not supposed to cross the Mississippi River? You're not supposed to send the native people across the Mississippi River, which was the intent. And this is an artist rendering of how spectacular that image was. And next slide. Mentioned the earthquakes. This is the only illustration that we know of, well, what happened to structures in the area from the New Madrid earthquakes. First off, next to nobody was living here. Second, this was the structure, pretty simple structure, so it's like, well, if it shakes, if it falls down, you must pretty much just put the logs back together, right? Be different if it happens soon. Next slide, please. Okay, now here is the quote from that's related to Captain Roosevelt. The comet was apparently visible during the New Madrid earthquakes in December 1811. A report on the first steamship to descend the Ohio River as it approached the confluence with the Mississippi River states, December 18, 1811. The anniversary of this day, the peoples of Cairo and its vicinity, that's Cairo, Illinois, not in Egypt, and its vicinity should never forget. It was the coming of the first steamboat to where Cairo now is, the New Orleans, Captain Roosevelt commanding. It was the severest day of the great throes of the New Madrid earthquake at the same time. A fiery comet was rushing to thwart. So it's like just wildly crazy at the same time. But notice the correspondence here. All this stuff is happening at once. The fire canoe, the comet, and most dramatic earthquakes that we have ever occurred in the East, and certainly had it was a long time before anything this big occurred. We'd have to wait till Alaska in 1964. Okay, now next slide, please. They didn't know about this, but this is how seismically active this area is. New Madrid is here, right in the middle of that solid right activity. As you know, with seismic areas, it's like they stay active. They don't change just because you have 2-3 earthquakes in 1811, 1812. Next slide, please. This is an image of Reelfoot Lake. It's 16 miles long. It didn't exist before the earthquake. All of a sudden, you have a 16-mile long lake. This is the type of earth changes that we're talking about happening here. Now, the other thing about this is that at one of these earthquakes, the Mississippi River actually appeared to go backward. Now, my interpretation of that is here comes the white technology that goes, oh, we can make our steamboat go in reverse. Because before this, you could not go back up the Mississippi River. You take your boat or your raft down, and the current's going the other way. So you just disassemble the boat and you travel back by land. But the idea that you could put it in reverse and go backward and go against the tide, it's almost like Mother Nature is saying, I can do that too. So, next slide, please. Now, what I want to try and do this evening is give a sense, as I put these eclipses together, of, okay, so how many days difference is there between when an eclipse takes place and when significant activity takes place? One of the things in that regard, again, if you go on the internet and all the, astronomers are there, well, they said that you can predict things, earthquakes related to eclipses, and well, you can't. Well, no, not the same day, but not long after. The first big primary event was on December 16 of 1811, and that's only 3 months after the eclipse. So next slide, please. The second big quake was later that same morning. As I said, the third big quake was on January the 23rd. The fourth was February 7th. And then the approximately 2,000 quakes that followed. So this is, again, just to give you a sense of how long after the eclipse do we see something happening. And it's less than a year, for sure, and usually a lot closer to the eclipse than that. There's so much going on at this time. Tecumseh, as I mentioned, he's uniting all of these tribes. He united like at least 13, 14 tribes. This is unprecedented. It's never happened before. That was all taking place at the same time. Most people when these go, oh, well, 1812, what happened? The War of 1812. Yeah, but these big eclipses happened before that, and certainly, in my opinion, outweighed the significance of that. But FYI, the War of 1812 started March of 1812, March 23rd. Next slide. Okay, the idea of the distance of the path. Now, this is the widest one, but it's also the most dramatic activity that we saw. It's about 425 miles from the path of totality to New Madrid, where the earthquakes happen. But the distance from the path of the gathering of Tecumseh was essentially right on the line. Next one. Okay, now we're moving up to 1831, and this is what's called the Nat Turner eclipse. One thing in terms of Fred Espenak, he's now retired, and I think he can come out of the closet. I think he's an astrologer. If not, he may not even know he's an astrologer, but if you make a correlation between what's happening in the sky and what's happening on Earth, that's astrology of some type. And he pointed out the story of Nat Turner. Now, again, we've got a very spiritual man. Nat Turner was a slave in Virginia and Eastern Virginia, but he was very, very spiritual man. And one of the things that he looked for was signs in the sky. And so, what's associated with this eclipse is Nat Turner's rebellion. He led a rebellion of slaves, and particularly what the rebellion involved was murdering white people who it was the slave owner, but he also killed, the wife and the kids and everybody in their sleep. And it's an amazing thing. For people that know a little bit of sun sign astrology, he's a Libra. So he's like really, really peace-oriented, and then he tips over the other way because of the outrageous things that every slave that he knew and before had gone through, and the apparent unbroken dynamic of this. He ran away to hide in the swamps. He got caught and was executed, and then, quite brutally executed, beheaded, skinned. I mean, just the usual atrocities that most people don't learn about in their fictional history classes. The other thing, though, about this is how close everything came to changing, because despite the atrocities, the Virginia Assembly came real close to outlawing slavery. In other words, hey, maybe this is messed up. Maybe we need to do away with this. So it came that close. And I was thinking, well, maybe if he hadn't killed the women and the babies. But as my old history teacher would say, gentlemen, you can't if in history. So next slide. This is the eclipse path that's associated with Nat Turner's rebellion. So you can see it coming through the Pacific and going out Canada and out into the Atlantic. But now we're going to zoom in on a closer shot just of the southeastern United States. And it goes through every slave state. You can't see it on here, but Maryland and Delaware, which were also slave states, zoom, 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 zoom. They didn't have slavery in Missouri yet. But every state that was a slave state, the eclipse went right through. Next slide, please. Okay. This slide I associate with the Trail of Tears. And even though the Trail of Tears itself happened much later than the eclipse that's associated with this in 1834, the legal decisions that were related to that are significant. This is an image of Elizabeth Brown Stevens, Cherokee, at the age of 82. When she was a little girl, she was one of the survivors of the Trail of Tears. Next slide, please. Again, we've got an eclipse that's associated with the eclipse of 1834, but is associated with Indian removal. The Chickasaw and Choctaw people had already decided, oh, what the heck, we'll go. Those had been prior to the eclipse. But the Cherokee were highly resistant to leaving. And the legal decisions that have been made relative to this is June 30th, 1834 was the Indian, sometimes it's called the Indian Intercourse Act, sometimes it's called the Indian Non-Intercourse Act. Interesting choice of words. But it basically said, okay, now we're going to have Indian territory that will be west of Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Not to say that any native people had any say in this, but that's the way it was going to be. Then we come after the solar eclipse. The solar eclipse that year, by the way, was November 30th of 1834. Less than a month later, it was 13 months later, was the Treaty of New Ecosia, which was where the Cherokees were headed in Georgia. At that time, it was their central area. And so the die was cast, even though the actual Trail of Tears was not going to come later because of the resistance of the Cherokees to make this change. Interesting thing about these tribes, while we have this slide up here, is there were the so-called 5 civilized tribes that include the Cherokee and so forth. The qualification in order to be registered as a civilized tribe was the owning of black slaves. The other tribes were not civilized. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This slide here is the eclipse path of 1834. And so we have coming together here is Nuakota. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Okay, next slide, please. Here is one of the Trail of Tears from Cherokee land. The other, you can see, is higher up. But notice where they cross. They cross up here, very close to New Madrid, and some other centers of activity that we're going to get to later. But this is a very active area. Southern Illinois, the boot heel of Missouri, going up high above the boot heel to Cape Giroux, and also extreme western Kentucky. So the Trail of Tears went up here. They were moving in the winter. The ice was 8 to 12 inches thick. So in order to get water, you had to break the ice. It was enormously tragic, and lots and lots of lives lost on that journey. The other paths are the routes that other tribes took, and there was a Cherokee route that involved crossing the Mississippi. And white people could cross for 12 cents, but Cherokees had to pay $1. Next slide, please. Okay, now, this is where the paths of the eclipses of 1831 and 1834 cross. So what we get here is, as you can see, the crossing is actually in Alabama, and this is kind of bringing together the tragic treatment of both the red and the black races here in this area. There's more than I can say, but we'll just keep rolling. Again, the eclipse date for 1831 was February 12th. The primary event was the Nat Turner's Rebellion, which was August 21st. He was going to do it on July 4th, but he was sick. So he postponed it. And notice what the date is, August 21st, the same date as our eclipse here in the coming year. Okay, time variable, it was about 190 days between the eclipse and the event. Next slide, please. The murders that took place, both of the white people and of Nat Turner and of some of his compatriots and lots of innocent slaves, were essentially right under the path of the eclipse of 1831. Next slide. Okay, the primary event time periods are variable here because different tribes were being removed at different times. So next slide. And again, we also have the tragedies occurred at variable distances from the crossing of those two eclipses and from the path of the 1834 eclipse. Next slide. Now we're moving up. And where is it? What in the world is that? Now we're moving up to the hurricane of Galveston of 1900. Okay. Oops. Yeah, hurricane threw that down. Okay, next slide. So, Galveston is, and as some of you know, is an island off of the coast of Texas, and Galveston City is the main city on the island Galveston. And this was the happening place economically in 1900 before this event. Now the thing about this is they were only about 8 feet above sea level. And so when the hurricane came crashing in, it actually gathered strength just 80 miles from Galveston Island. And this is the type of damage that it did. This is the deadliest U.S. Disaster ever. 20% of the island died, and a minimum of 6,000 people, and estimates have been as high as double that. So this is like at least 2, 3, 4 9/11s. And how many people here, no, won't embarrass anybody, how many people have even heard of this? You know, what goes for American history in classes is outrageous, in my opinion. Okay, and the date of the hurricane was September 8 of 1900. The hurricane had actually formed a little bit earlier, and we can go to the next slide. Here's the path of the eclipse of May 28, 1900. Galveston's right here. The hurricane started here, came around, and it kind of like did one of those cartoon kind of warm-up punches, and it kind of gained momentum right over the path of totality before striking Galveston Island. Okay, next slide. So the solar eclipse that year of 1900 was in the North America was May 28. Primary event, the Galveston hurricane, was September 8 of 1900, and the time variable from the eclipse to the event was 103 days, about 103 days. Next slide. Okay, and the devastation was approximately 80 miles from the path of the eclipse. Thank you. Now we're up to 1918. Now this is a significant one for us to remember because this is the last time that we had an eclipse that go from sea to shining sea, from the Pacific to Atlantic. Eclipse paths always go from west to east. It's the reverse of usually, well, you know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But the eclipses go the other way. So this is going to be about 99 years since we've had one like what's coming here August 21st of this year. Next slide. Well, the big event of 1918, people will go, oh, wasn't that World War I? It's like, The big event was the so-called Spanish influenza, and it wasn't, it didn't originate in Spain, but that was the name that caught on. What you're seeing on the screen is, in my opinion, one of the great American Christian mystics, and that is Blind Willie Johnson. Now, one interesting thing about watching eclipses is there's two theories about how Blind Willie became blind. One is he watched a solar eclipse. So be sure and get your glasses before you leave. I got free glasses for you here. In his song, God Don't Never Change, very spiritual, mystical song. It's a cool song, and a great guitar, too. He mentions, in the time of the influenza, he surely was a God to me. Well, yeah, I mean, thank goodness he survived the influenza. But the thing about that year is that, unlike other flus, this attacked primarily healthy young people who were, like, particularly between about the ages of 20 and 25. And that's how old Blind Willie Johnson was at the time. So he really was blessed to survive that. Now, one of the things about why this whole thing took off in the tragic way that it did, not only in this country but around the world, 3 to 5% of the population of the world got wiped out by this flu. And one of the things that was happening in the United States is Wall Street had decided that we needed to go to war in Europe, even though the American people did not want to go to war. And the socialist Eugene Debs got locked up for encouraging people to resist the draft and not go to war. But we were at war, and therefore lots of people of that vulnerable age were being put together in barracks all across the country, including, and you'll see a picture here from Wikipedia, Fort Riley, Kansas. This is where the first case was reported. Now it's going to be interesting when we see the eclipse path in relation to that. Next slide, please. This is Kansas, and there's the eclipse path. Now that occurred before the eclipse. That first infestation that really took out, I think, like 100 soldiers at that base alone, or that installation. But in terms of the significance for the whole country, again, take a look at these percentages of totality. That most of the country was experiencing, if you go northeast, at least 50% in New England. In a lot of places, 75% or more. So this is the type of eclipse that's likely to, whatever it's about, it's likely to have a larger impact rather than just locally. But we could, to play devil's advocate, you could say, yeah, but what about the other people that were dying around the world? Well, I'm just trying to present what information I have, not be a know-it-all. So next slide, please. The solar eclipse of 1918 was June 8th of 1918. The primary big event was the so-called Spanish influenza. First case, March 11, 1918. But it was July of 1918, just the following month, was when they named it Spanish influenza. One of the things that were going on is they weren't telling people that this flu was going around because there was a high degree of censorship of information. They didn't, it's like the war is on. We have to keep secrets, so we have to keep morale up. And then it was the eclipse of 1918 because it's by the time we're getting into October, that was the worst month. Still going on, but tapering into December. And the last case, as far as I know, it was like just in the early days of January 1919. So again, about 6 months later, the eclipse is over. I mean, the event associated with the eclipse. Next slide, please. As I said, eclipses move from west to east, but this country is particularly known for movement from east to west, and associated with the following image. Manifest Destiny. This image has been associated with Manifest Destiny. This is American Progress by John Gast. Even though he created this image on commission to try and get people to move to the west, Manifest Destiny was actually a product of the 1840s, and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, by the way, for the astrologers here. But in the image, we have the railroads coming, the telegraph is coming, the stagecoach is coming, the prospectors are coming, the pioneers are coming, but who's running? The grizzly bear, Native Americans, and the buffalo. And where do you run when you get to the other end of the country? Nowhere else to go. So that's the story of go west, young man. But let's go to the next slide. So now, with eclipses, we're talking about movement from west to east. There are two tragic stories, American stories, fictional stories, that are associated with movement from west to east. One of them is a powerful movie that I highly recommend if you haven't already seen it, called The Homesman. And it stars Hilary Swank and Tommy Lee Jones. And this is actually your non-Western. This is a story that focuses on the women. It focuses on the hardships, and actually involves Hilary Swank's character is helping 3 young women who've gone insane to head back east. And they're moving through the Nebraska territory, which is where our eclipse is coming through this year. And the next tragedy about going from west to east occurred with the movie Easy Rider. And notice the lower case. This is how it was presented. Peter Fonda talked about what this movie was really about, and he saw it as it was an American tragedy. His character and his fellow motorcyclist were drug dealers. They were lowlifes. And Easy Rider is a term from the brothels of New Orleans, where the man who gets the free ride with the prostitute is called an Easy Rider. And this is an American tragedy. And if you remember the movie, maybe you saw it when it came out in the late 60s. You may remember, some of the tragic elements, but there's more to it than that. There's a lot more I could say about links to the Tecumseh story, but for reasons of time, we'll roll along. Now, finally, thanks for your patience. Now we have finally come to the great American eclipse of 2017. The image on the screen here is designed by Kathy Levine, and in terms of west and east, she's in North Carolina, and this wonderful image of the Mermaid is, in astrology, there are images for each of the 360 degrees. These images have been around since 1925, and they've been significantly studied, particularly since 1951, as amazingly, these images do seem to work. So the image of this eclipse is a mermaid. And I'm going to talk about the mermaid from an American perspective first, and then we're going to go into a contemporary mermaid connection. In this recording that came out in 2014 is called Divided and United, the Songs of the Civil War. And these were songs that were sung during the Civil War. And one of the songs is called the Mermaid Song. And the Mermaid Song was that when sailors see a mermaid, that's it, the ship is going down. Another song that's on here is Beautiful Dreamer by Stephen Foster. And that's another story about that the mermaids will sing the dying one to death. So in other words, woo, there's a morbid potential for mermaids, but there's other sides to it too. And some people may remember the film Splash, so that it can have a comic dimension, or to bring it forward to modern times, since this eclipse is in the sign of Leo, I think we should have a woman who goes by the name of Cat Power sing us a mermaid song. Now, that song has 7.5 million likes on YouTube or listens. So it seems like this is our image for this time in this eclipse. And I think it'd be great if this mermaid thing would just catch off, particularly on all the coastal places, and have the mermaid eclipse. So hopefully that'll catch on. We'll see. Now, as I said, this is the eclipse that unites and divides. And we are now going to move to the next slide. This shows you a global perspective of this eclipse. of August 21st of this year, 2017. We start in the Pacific. Hawaii will, if they're lucky, they may get a little bit of partial eclipse viewing. But then it comes across here from the Pacific and crosses from here in Oregon, not right here in Eugene. You got to go north if you want to be under path of totality. And then it continues across the country, exits here in Charleston, and then it continues out into the Atlantic off the coast of West Africa. We can go to the next slide. Now you can see here the path coming across. This is also shown up over there on the paper map. And what I found interesting about this is the eclipse comes through Lincoln City, Lincoln, Nebraska, southern Illinois, land of Lincoln, exits over Fort Sumter. And if we continue this, it's basically the route of the slave ships. So, in my opinion, this is significantly about the racial status of the United States. And in terms of between the time I gave this talk on June 29th and in this evening of July 20th, up here in Montana, not too far from the line, you may have heard that there was first a 5.8 and then a 4.0 eclipse near a place called Lincoln, Montana. Earthquakes. Earthquakes, thank you. So we got one theme going on here is the Mermaid theme. Now, one thing that's interesting about the Mermaid theme is we'll see in a moment that the eclipse goes right over OSU. We could go to the next slide. Yeah, here we are. Goes right over OSU, where there's a significant center of study of the ocean and the condition of the ocean. And I think it'd be pretty interesting if we have a female ocean specialist come forward, because eclipses are significant beginnings and endings. New things are going to come out of the changes of the present time, and revelations is another word associated with eclipses. Now, to get more detailed, here's Lincoln City, here's Lincoln Beach. Look how close it is. Yeah, and then you can see the path of totality is coming across right there. All these colorful lines, you see the purple ones, you're going to be under totality, but if you wanted the longest experience of totality, like millions of people who are probably going to come here, at least 1 million people are estimated to come to Oregon alone. I think it's going to be a lot more. It's a blue state, for one thing. At least this part of it. Most of it's going over the so-called red states. One thing about eclipses is there is a verb, to be eclipsed. When you think things are going to happen, but then they don't end up happening. I don't even know whether I'm going to be able to see this eclipse. Had plans all set up about how that was going to happen, and those plans fell through. So maybe we'll get to see the eclipse, maybe not. And the other thing is just in terms of weather. If you're over here, maybe it's going to get clouded out. The eclipse will appear to be moving extremely fast, but what's really moving really fast is the Earth. So this is just going to be booking. So it's like 10:15, eclipse starts, the whole thing's over like 10:27, and it's just racing across the country. Now, in terms of the timing of the eclipse, there's about an hour of darkening, then there's the moment of totality, and then the darkness moves away. So it's basically about a 2-hour process. Now, one thing that's happening right before August 21st, on Saturday, and that's on Monday, by the way, on Saturday, August 19th, is Millions for Prisoners' Human Rights march on Washington. Now, obviously, there are people of every color who are incarcerated, but there's a significant African-American incarceration that goes on. And what I found interesting about this is Bob Dylan is so prophetic. I could spend more time this evening than you probably are going to give me to talk about how many prophetic things are in his songs. But in his song, I Shall Be Released, he says, I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, I shall be released. Now, one of the things about this is, in terms of the path of totality, it's going to go over, I'm sure a lot of prisons, but one of the big ones it's going to go over is Leavenworth. Next slide. And speaking of the 12th house, in astrology, the 12th houses are places of confinement. Attics, basements, closets, corners. But they're also places of social confinement like hospitals, mental institutions, and they're also places of solitude. So there's only one individual's chart that I'm going to talk about tonight. There are some extraordinarily gifted astrologers in this audience. Internationally famous Demetra George is over here. Our wonderful Joanna Mitchell, who has just given so much love on this stage for a good cause every year for I don't know how many years it's been going on. And lots of others, and I don't mean to dishonor anybody, but we'll just keep on rolling. So I'm only going to talk about the astrology of one individual because he's a man. In Trump's chart, this is a very powerful eclipse. And it is associated with being backed in a corner or in a place of confinement. Trump has Mars in the sign of Leo. And when you put Mars in a corner, it's like the lion is backed up in the corner. And what's happening now, this year, is Mars is closing in for what's called the return. It's coming back to the same place where it was. So more and more, he is backed into a corner. His angry lion self is likely to get more angry as we head towards this eclipse. And the eclipse is also very close to what's called the ascendant or the horizon line, which is the beginning of physical appearance and physical self-awareness. I don't wish this on anybody, but what I think is likely to happen, it's already come out that this man, geriatric experts say that he has significant mental, emotional problems, and I think they're likely to get worse. Because the mermaid that we saw earlier is sitting, you've seen that classic picture of the mermaid sitting on the rock. There's even a possibility that he may not even be able to walk anymore. When he was in Rome, the world leaders walked a short distance across the plaza, and he had to get in a golf cart. And there's also stories about he's extremely nervous about steps and even inclines. So it doesn't look good for him. And some people could go, oh, yay, yay, yay. Well, of course, who's going to replace him? So one of the things is, well, if it doesn't look good for him, and he's the leader of America, and the other thing about eclipses is that what's been known for, at least going back to the ancient Greeks, if not, is if Mars is near the eclipse, it's not a good time to go to war. And Mars is very close to where the sun and moon will be. So if he decides that what he's going to do, since he's backed in a corner, is to start or amp up a war, it doesn't look good for him or the country. So that said, let's move on. So the solar eclipse of August 21st. What's going to be the big primary event? Who knows? We got some possibilities we're going to take a look at here momentarily. And what will be the distance from the path of totality? Well, since we don't know what the event is, we don't know. But it's likely, based on what I've seen with the other eclipses, something's going to happen, probably within months, maybe within just a month itself. But after this big hoopla of the eclipse and all the craziness and the gridlock, and this is all happening during the dog days of August, and the people are not likely to have enough water, and our cars overheating, it's likely to be a big mess. If you go, I don't even know whether I want to watch the eclipse, you can do what the Hopis recommend and other people. Just go quiet inside and pray. And one thing to do personally for each of us, and again, consult your local astrologer, is wherever the eclipse is, it's an opportunity for an ending of one way and the beginning of another. So if you want to take that time, whether you're under the eclipse path or not, and just have a little moment of like, in this area of my life, what area of your chart, how would you like to make a significant new start in that area? But talk to your local astrologer, or if you do it yourself, check your own chart. But after this eclipse is going to be, people go, oh, okay, well, everything just goes back to normal, baseball and apple pie, etc. But, we got another eclipse coming in 2024. This is the eclipse path of April 8 of 2024. The eclipse starts in the southern Pacific, comes through Mexico, and it crosses into the United States at Eagle Pass. And this is what I love about astrology. Everything is so incredibly symbolic. It's almost like it gets more symbolic. It's like the eagle is in the Mexican-American flag, and then it's commonly placed on, as an icon of the United States. And then, as you can see, it curves up through from Texas through Arkansas and continues this arc up into Maine, then out into northeastern Canada, and then continues out to the Atlantic. Next slide. Okay, and then just for curiosity's sake, and these are the areas of the amount of totality. So like here in Oregon, we're not going to see much of it, of the eclipse of 2024. But a pretty interesting thing is going to happen in this area, or you can also see it marked on that map as where the crossing takes place. And there it is on this map. Notice this area: southern Illinois, southeastern Missouri, western Kentucky, northeastern Arkansas. We saw that before, didn't we? Okay, next slide. Now, this is where the two lines are crossing. It's basically like this diamond shape. And for the sake of the recording here, in case people can't see the map, is this includes Carbondale, Illinois, Hopkinsville, Kentucky. We're going to talk about that one in a moment. Poplar Bluff, that's where there was the 30-foot drop that I talked about in 1811, and other places like Union City. And we saw Camp Girardeau just below the Trail of Tears before. Next slide. Okay, now this is your federal tax dollars at work, not making bombs or other things. This is the USGS map for areas of seismic hazard, with the highest hazards being in the magenta and then blending into red, etc. So of course we all know about here where we are on this coast, where the Ring of Fire goes right up the Pacific coast, Florence, etc., Lincoln City. But look at this significant area right here that includes New Madrid and comes down here. And then remember, the eclipse path comes across here to Carolina, to Charleston, another seismic unstable area. And here is the overlap of the eclipse path on top of the USGS map. Here, here, here. Now, as you've noticed from seeing the other eclipse paths, we don't know where the event is going to be in relation to the eclipse path. Might it be here on the Ring of Fire? Might it be here in what looks like high probability in the New Madrid area again? Or might it be down in Charleston? Next slide. Okay, FYI, these are all nuclear plants marked by the little black triangles, also known as tombstones. And you can see how many of them are in proximity. Remember what I said earlier before about the New Madrid quakes, is it shakes the ground considerably farther in the east. Not as much here. When you have a big quake here, it's basically regional. But a whole lot of shaking going on in these areas. Way back in 1912, Carl Jung told us, America does not see that it is in any danger, does not understand that it is facing its most tragic moment. It must make a choice to master its machines or be devoured by them. And that's the nukes. No nukes is good nukes. And here's another interesting map. These are not eclipse paths. These are seismic cracks that have been discovered. There's a 1,700-mile so-called crack across America. It starts actually in the Idaho mountains, but it's usually extended up to the Ring of Fire area around Port Angeles. And then it comes all the way down to the Appalachians, the Smoky Mountains area, Cherokee area there too. Then there's another crack that they discovered that basically comes down all the waterways from Canada and then comes down and crosses here in, guess what area? Notice also, all this is the United States. Canada's not involved. Okay, so this is a zoom of what we saw before of the area of the crossings of 2017 and 2024. And what I really want to point out about this is the Shawnee National Forest. It will be in the path actually of both 2017 and 2024. But Vince and I were doing the best we can to try and create this using a map that we could generate here. But there's an interesting thing about the Shawnee National Forest. There's an area there that's called the Garden of the Gods. This is a national monument. Gods? It's like, wait a minute, isn't it the big monotheistic Judeo-Christian God? It's like, nope, it's the Garden of the Gods. And it's a great place to see the eclipse, I'm told, in part of that area. But remember that Tecumseh was Shawnee. So very significant. And Paducah here plays a significant part in history as well. But let's roll to the next one. Remember the image of Reelfoot Lake? This is the Reelfoot Rift. This is an area, when we saw that big red blob, this is a zoom of this. You can see there's New Madrid. There's the Kentucky-Tennessee border, western Kentucky, western Tennessee, Arkansas down here, and the Boot Heel of Missouri. In terms of the Reelfoot Wildlife Refuge, you can see that on the right, and the Reelfoot Lake State Park is down here. All right. In terms of, well, what happens when you have a magnitude 6.8, 6.7? Here in California, well, you have your primary area for this 94 quake in Southern California was in the red, and then secondarily it was the yellow area here. But look what would happen, what happened back in 1895 in the same area. Now, this was not anywhere near as big of a quake as what happened in 1811, 1812. That's just a 6.8. Next slide. Okay, well, in terms of the numbers, what the heck are these numbers? Now, I'll just run through this quickly, and thanks again for your patience this evening. But, 5.0 to 5.9, this is like what happened up in Montana, 5.8. It's like things fall off the shelves, so if it's glass, it breaks, and that kind of thing. but there actually can be liquefaction. That's when the Earth looks like it's water. Then 6.0 to 6.4, it's hard to walk. Liquefaction, landslides. 6.5 to 6.9, liquefaction, landslides, and it's hard to even stand up. 7.0, this is what happened in Haiti in 2010. Liquefaction, landslide, difficult to drive, and if you're in a chair, you bounce around like you're going over potholes. The 8.0 to 8.9, like what happened in 2010 off the shore of Chile, you get knocked to the ground, you can only crawl. Water goes up in the air. And the big ones, 9.0 to 9.9, we had a 9.0 in Japan with the tsunami, and this was related to Fukushima in 2011. And the biggest one in the US is Alaska in 1964. That was a 9.4. And this is where you get, major collapse, and, just far more extremes. Okay, next slide. So what's going to happen, coinciding with this eclipse of April the 8th of 2024? We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, but, probably something of significance. And wanted to talk now about this gentleman, Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was born and spent the early part of his life in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And he, as many of you know, he's an amazing healer. He would go into a dreamlike trance, and he would be able to tell people all kinds of amazing things about how they could heal. And he was also prophetic in a lot of ways. And one of the things that he did was predict earth changes of various sorts. Next slide. But one of the things he also talked about is there would come a great leveling economically. So it's interesting. It's like, well, you get the leveling of the buildings. The Trump Tower would collapse if it was under an earthquake. But you also get an economic leveling, he says. So in other words, if big, heavy stuff comes down, every eclipse is a significant ending, but it's a significant new beginning. So as Tracy Chapman saying, we can resolve to start all over and make a new beginning. Next slide. Help's on the way. It's you. This is not meant to be a depressing talk or a scary talk. For one thing, it's like, you may want to consider, developing or turning to whatever your spiritual orientation is during the time that we're in now and the time that's coming. But the other thing is, amazing things happen when people come together in a crisis. And what you see on the screen now is the lyrics to a song that Crosby, Stills, and Nash did years ago called Wooden Ships, lyrics by Stephen Stills and Paul Kantner. And they talked about what would happen after a nuclear war, a nuclear catastrophe. And the idea is that people would get together. They would cooperate. They would share. Next slide. Because billions is not enough for this man, I can't show you anything that's on the Washington Post website, but I can tell you you could go and look at 92 seconds of what so-called ordinary people can do. This is just 4 quick events, and they're all back east. They're all in the southeast, and one of them is Ellicott City, Maryland. One is Muscle Shoals, Alabama. One is down in Texas. I don't remember the exact location. And one is Panama City Beach in Florida. And again, between the time I gave this talk and now, what happened in Panama City Beach is this little family went too far out into the ocean past the riptide, and spontaneously 80 people, some of whom couldn't even swim, and of different races, spontaneously formed a human chain and brought everybody in including the 67-year-old woman who had had a heart attack. People are amazing. The comeback is amazing. And the way this country is going now, if something has to happen to bring us together, maybe this is what it's going to be. The other stories here, it was very moving down in Texas. You see a brother with dreadlocks and, you know, a big Bubba guy with a baseball cap, and they're saving a baby. I mean, people are amazing, and this whole idea of moving past the prejudices, the hate, the assumptions, the cynicism, and the lack of spirituality, I think can happen in times of change like this. So, it's time to be here now. Thanks for all the time that you've given me. Thanks for Tsunami. Be sure and support this great place. And there's my contact information. There's some contact information back there on the stage. And the wonderful Vince Pinero and Fast Pixel Media to make amazing presentations like this. Thank you very much. And I got Eclipse glasses. You're welcome. Okay. Okay. Thank you all very much. And support Tsunami. Hi, I'm Dale O'Brien, and thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to help out with what I've already shared and help me be able to share more videos and podcasts and such, please go to Patreon. And your donations are very welcome on a monthly basis or otherwise. Thanks.